Joining me now is the editorial director at the Huffington Post Media Group, Howard Fineman, and Washington bureau chief for BuzzFeed, John Stanton. Howard, let me start with you here. If you were a Democrat in Congress, what would you be doing on the eve of the establishment of the House Select Committee on Benghazi?
Well, the House Democrats are trying to decide precisely how to handle it. They know they need to respond. The question is in what form and how. Inside the committee room, outside the committee room, some combination of the two. They're discussing that now. I think they'll end up inside the committee room to protect the witnesses, if nothing else. What's going on here with the Republicans is beyond fundraising. It's beyond getting out the base. To me, especially if you know where Trey Gowdy comes from, in the reddest of the red part of South Carolina, this is almost an act of political cocooning by the Republicans. They want to be in the warm embrace of their own deepest fears. It's what makes them comfortable. It's what makes them happy. And Trey Gowdy is going to be leading the parade now, and is really a Tea Party guy. You know, so you said this isn't Tea Party. This is contempt. Well, Trey in his second term is fundamentally a Tea Party guy, and so the Tea Party in essence is in charge of the politics of investigation now, which is right where they want to be.
John, let's talk about Trey Gowdy a little bit, the attorney who yesterday on our air on Morning Joe accidentally called Benghazi a trial. This is a man that Dana Milbank in the Washington, of whom Dana Milbank writes, Gowdy, known for wild-eyed, high-volume bursts of pious indignation. His climb is a key example of how the Republican Party has blunted the Tea Party threat in large part by co-opting the movement, which is a hair of a shade different from what Howard was saying, but ultimately the fundamental point here is the Tea Party has been embraced fully and completely, it seems, with the ascension of Trey Gowdy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, in these kind of instances, neither party has ever gone to the sort of the measured guy who's going to come in and sort of thoughtfully investigate a president of the opposite party. You know, and it's always the folks that are on the Judiciary Committee who are always the most partisan, and they're always the most sort of willing to go into these, like you say, high-minded sort of, you know, flights of, you know, moral outrage.
High-volume bursts of pious indignation.
Exactly. And I think, you know, he's a very classic example of that. You know, and I think, you know, the fact that he called it a trial was a bit of a slip of the tongue, but I think obviously they are going to be trying to put the administration on trial. And, you know, the good thing for leadership on the Republican side, at least, is that while he is definitely a Tea Party guy, he is also a Boehner guy and a sort of loyal to the party, and he's not going to go too far afield into some of the wilder kind of conspiracy theories about what happened. So I think, you know, they get best of both worlds from their perspective with having him there.
John, let me follow up on that in terms of who's going to be on this committee. Does Darrell Issa get a seat? I mean, he's the guy that's been waving the Benghazi flag for years now, and wouldn't it be completely awkward not to give him a seat on this committee? At the same time, I'm sure nobody actually wants to do that.
Yeah, you know, there are a number of Republicans actually in the conference, and a fair number in the Senate particularly, who have been pretty disappointed with his handling of Benghazi and also of the IRS scandal, and they don't want to necessarily see him there. He's very confrontational. He's very much a sort of a lightning rod for Democratic ire. He and, you know, Representative Cummings go at it pretty much on a day-to-day basis, and I know that there are a number of Republicans that want this to have at least some sort of semblance of not being, you know, a trial. And then they want to have folks that are going to come in and ask sort of serious questions, not just about the talking points, but about the broader issue of what happened in Benghazi. So there's going to definitely be pressure on Boehner not to have folks like Issa on the panel.
Yeah, but Howard, the seriousness of this is greatly compromised by the fact that you have the NRCC sending out fundraising emails. There is another one. There is a Tea Party group, the Patriots for Economic Freedom, which is sending out blasts on behalf of Ted Cruz to investigate Benghazi, and Ted Cruz refuses to surrender. I mean, the naked opportunism on display here, and the fact that John Boehner cannot seemingly corral it, nor can Trey Gowdy, I think is a real issue for Republicans.
Yeah, I think the fundraising thing is obviously cheap, but not that surprising. In fact, there was a day when special investigative committees did have an aura of augustness about them. They weren't usually headed by two-term congressmen. They were headed by veterans who at least could portray the aura of judiciousness and bipartisanship. That's completely missing here. What the Republicans are up to is to combine Benghazi and the IRS into their narrative of a big government that is oppressive, that is dishonest, that is even murderous. In the case of Benghazi, that's going to be what they're going to talk about via fundraising, via their media outlets, via their campaigns. It's what they're comfortable doing. It's not just that they don't want to talk about Obamacare because it's been more successful than they imagined. This is the kind of stuff that they like. They like the near black helicopter stuff.
Well, and
that's what Trey Gowdy is going to put judicial-sounding, prosecutorial cloth around.
But Howard, I mean, you're a political veteran. It was not always like this. I mean, and Jane Mayer wrote a great piece in the New Yorker that reminded everybody of the Beirut barracks bombing in 1983 under Reagan, where, yes, Tip O'Neill launched an investigation, but it was a bipartisan effort. There were recommendations made. Some of those were instituted slowly enough that another bombing happened in the interim, but it was not a witch hunt the way this is. And it had hundreds of casualties.
I know, and that was my point earlier. I was actually, being a political veteran, going even farther back to the days of Watergate, where Sam Ervin, yes, he was a very partisan Democrat from North Carolina, but he conveyed a sense of calm and judiciousness, and more like a judge than a prosecutor. Trey Gowdy's a prosecutor. That's what he was. He's better suited for this than Darrell Issa, who is a car alarm salesman. Okay.
Well, so he's been ringing the alarm bell, so you can think of that as sort of the appetizer to all this. John, let me ask you before we go the question of what the Democrats do. Elijah Cummings sent out a letter today urging a no vote in terms of whether Democrats should participate on the committee. For the past year and a half, the House Republican investigations into Benghazi have been characterized by extreme and counterproductive partisanship. Another partisan review that serves only to politicize these attacks is disrespectful and unworthy of the American people. That is really strong language, and I wonder, from your vantage point on the Hill, how difficult will that make it for Nancy Pelosi to actually appoint anybody if that's ultimately the decision she makes?
Oh, I think if it was up to her, she would say no, and she would not have anybody on the committee. Unfortunately, I think a large majority of her conference wants to have people on, as Howard said, in one instance at least, to try to protect some of the witnesses that are going to be coming forward, but also to be able to fight back politically against them and not give them an unfettered megaphone to attack the White House.
We shall see what happens. The chapter unfolds on an hourly and daily basis. Howard Fineman and John Stanton, thank you as always for your time.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you.